And I really like the way this next sequence turned out. It's another one of our scary sequences, but sort of a slightly different value comes out of it. Sort of there's a little bit more suspense, and it sort of reminds me a little bit of the kinds of sequences you would find in old Hitchcock movies. The sort of the waiting for something bad and awful to happen and knowing it's going to happen and watching the sliver of light slowly disappear.
Well, Will always used to say, which I always thought was very clever, he's like, the longer it takes before we cut away, the more the audience knows something bad's going to happen in this sequence. Mm-hmm. Because fundamentally, you could have cut him down, right? And then you could cut to the lab. Right. And that would be okay movie grammar. Or here,
you can keep dragging.
You could cut him down, but you could pull the knife out, it'd be okay. But instead, he starts dragging. Now you could still cut out, and it'd be okay. But the longer he keeps dragging, the clearer signal you're sending to the audience that it ain't over yet. And that's really scary. And, you know, what starts to emerge is, of course, we hope, frightening. On the day, it couldn't have been more absurd.
Right.
But fundamentally, it's a guy with a green suit
and a dog puppet on his hand.
And it was the least scary thing ever on the planet.
Yeah. And this was nice. This was a combination of real light and effects. And so we had a big, powerful xenon that was cutting this swath of light across the ground, but the beam and the little bugs floating through the air, the little floaties, as we called them, were all added in post. But we had this sort of interactive light that was getting narrower and narrower as the sun was setting. Abby stuff. So Abby and her trainer worked really hard on this. Our dog trainer had these Mexican hairless dogs that were pretty frightening looking, and so we based these off of the Mexican hairless dogs, and me and the visual effects supervisor went up to his ranch and we videotaped this dog being sort of taunted by this bone and snarling and hopping around, and that's what the movement of these dogs was based on, which is pretty realistic, and is sort of being kept back by this light until the light just finally disappears here and they charge.
A very difficult sequence because it's an integration of CG dogs and actual Abby, and we were also wrestling with the next phase, in some ways, the more real-time phase of his Job journey, which is what's going to happen to Abby. And it's remarkable what happens when you start to work with the idea of the loss of an animal. This moment right there got people, when Abby is limping, got people making sounds and turning away, even on the day it was filmed.
And surprisingly enough, that's just her with a bunch of smudge on her body and a piece of tape on her paw. That's how you make a dog limp, by the way, is putting a piece of tape on their paw.
I've been putting tape on Francis's paw for a while, but he won't limp.
Yeah.
Hey. You know, we worked on what it looks like for Abby to be hurt and
get sick,
and then, you know, what it's going to look like for Abby to die. And this was a very, very tricky sequence, and is very, very shrewdly directed. You know, because as you'll see, Abby dies
off camera.
Yeah, and Abby's death is entirely related to the audience through Will's performance. Now, having said that, this was, for us, right up until the end, one of the most controversial scenes. We felt that it was important to the movie and understood that it really was insufferable for some people. During our first preview, people walked out at this scene. And I think a certain percentage of people found the movie finally impossible to take because of this scene.
Yeah, but that ends up being just kind of a reaction people have to animals. There's sort of a purity to animals and an innocence, and you know, people are much more willing to even see children die in movies than they are to see a dog die.
But you know, it's very interesting because we decided that we were more willing to have the audience alienate some people and really resonate for what we thought would be more the people like us than we were to sort of make the movie its most palatable. And I think that, you know, we tried to make those kind of decisions all the way through, and I think it really served us.
I think it does too, and I think we realized if you were to sort of take this out, it just made the movie feel smaller, and it's not in a scope way. I guess it's an emotional scope versus a visual scope. It just felt like less complex and less emotionally complicated without this loss for Neville.
It's an impossible thing to have to imagine.
Yeah.
And
that's really the shot, by the way, that saves the whole sequence,
it
which
is.
is you need to know that Sam is no longer Sam, that Sam has turned.
And it's very funny, in very early drafts of the script, Sam used to come back, and Francis and I were kind of like, nah, not so much. But so strong were the instincts.
Yeah, we had to convince some people
Yeah.
at Warner Brothers that no, Sam cannot come back. That would be a little too ridiculous.
And giving us the hardest idea, which is to kill something that you love to save.
And also one of my favorite parts in the movie. Performance-wise, he just did a great job, but also I found this sort of, the more simply we approached sequences, the more effective they were. And the idea of just holding on a close-up of Will and letting Will's performance tell the story was so appealing. Yeah, this was 7th Avenue.
There were so many people out. There were some certain things we could close down and effectively evacuate, and others we couldn't. And there were a lot of people painted out of that shot.
And this was day 1 of filming.
That's right.
Welcome to I Am Legend, Will. Today you're burying the dog. And I remember we were playing Adagio for strings on a loudspeaker. And we shot this at sunset at the end of our very first day.
It was Will's birthday.
It was Will's birthday, and we were shooting out at an apple farm in northern, I guess it was like Westchester County.
Yeah.
And we put Blue out there and dropped in Central Park because the people in Central Park won't let you do anything in Central Park, so you can't actually shoot there. Not if you want to have equipment there.
Unless you're enchanted, apparently.
I guess,
You can
yeah.
somehow shoot there and the Time Warner building.
Right.
Even though we were a Time Warner movie
Yes.
but couldn't.
Fun shot.
Yeah.
Just our big 7th Avenue pullback. He's lost everything, and he's utterly alone. Them too.
Yeah. Well, it's just great how long
Yeah.
it is.
And then this is another one of my favorite little pieces. This whole string of scenes I really enjoy, and this for a while was sort of, we called it the please. Promise my friend I would say hello, and that's the way the scene was written. And Will had this great performance of saying hello to her. And I remember I went up to him at one point and said, when you say hello, play it as please say hello to me, hoping that the mannequin would say hello. But instead of just playing it that way, he actually said it. And somehow the scene changing and him actually saying it, sort of like instantly everybody watching the monitor kind of broke out into tears. And it was really effective.
Lead into a longer sequence. There was a kind of detour here, which is actually pretty interesting. Finally, in terms of pace, wasn't for us in terms of the cut of the movie, but this was a gateway into even more content.
There's our mannequin again from the Italian store.
She's by the porn section, by the way.
Yeah, which we got a little flack for.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
But you can't really tell.
You see a couple in the lower left-hand corner is the Da Vinci load.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, we crack ourselves up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we liked, Francis, you said that this lifted out. There was a sequence between that.
And the driving.
Ignore all that. Emotional immediacy was better without it.
Yes. What we call the demolition derby
This
sequence.
is a digital map painting. Right?
And yep, we built this, a different version of our spud barge, our pier, in a huge armory in the Bronx, the same place where we shot the Times Square sequence. And this was sort of a big elaborate sequence here with R40 creatures and a car driving around and pretty elaborate rigs. And
I'm not entirely
Stunts.
happy, personally, with some of the CG in the medium shots here.
Well, I'm not actually that happy with a lot of the CG in the medium shots in general.
Yeah.
It's what there was an interesting thing that happened. Sorry, Sony ImageWorks, if you're listening to this, but it's true. We said it in the room with those guys, that there's kind of an amazing quality to the empty city shots with the augmentation that they did there, and also to some of the close-ups,
Yeah, their performance.
which you would just think would be the hardest thing ever.
Yeah.
And so some of the close-ups in the ending and of the girl on the table are just insane with the quality of the skin and the breathing and the performance and
But some
the
of
light.
this-
And then you get some of these medium shots are just funky,
Yeah.
and it's actually based on real people doing these real actions, and it just gets a little animated.
You can just feel in some of the motion that it's not quite real, and it's unfortunate because, as Francis said, that which would seem to be harder was executed very good.
That is an unbelievable close-up, and that's hard to beat, and that's completely CG and so realistic. And then you just get into some of the mediums, and it doesn't hold up to the same quality. The idea behind this sequence, which I sort of enjoy, is this idea of multiple car collisions was kind of the thinking behind it. With he's trying to ram these things, and they sort of turn the tables, and they turn on him. Also, this stuff is pretty amazing too of Alpha. Just the quality, and the eyes are just great. Reveal of somebody else using a UV flare. I always liked the idea that you might think it's his wife and daughter. But then you quickly see that it's not. It's kind of a hot Brazilian girl.
That's Lisi Braga, whom we love. We cast her, first off, she was the first person we met with. She was beautiful and genuine and talented. We'd all seen her work in City of God, and we fell for her.
Yeah, she was the only person that came in and met with us and read with Will. And we sort of played a joke on her and brought her back in one day when we were testing with all the creatures. Brought her back in, and she thought she was going to, be put through the paces again, and we gave her the job on the spot the very next day. And one of the things I think that Will and I really liked about casting a girl from South America was that because our whole movie takes place in New York and, in and around Manhattan, that it suddenly made the problem we're talking about in this movie seem much more global when somebody with an accent shows up and you find out that they've actually, crossed from a different continent and come to America by boat, and the problem has been very, very global, and it's happening outside of Manhattan as well.
Used to be a lot more backstory to that too. One of our signature sequences. Signature in a couple of ways. First, because when we talk about the differing and contrasting or complementary scales of the movie, you have arguably the most epic sequence in terms of visual effects. You have the destruction of all the bridges leading to and from Manhattan except the George Washington Bridge. And then you have the setup for what is going to be the worst loss in the movie.
And we actually had one more shot that we pulled almost last minute, which was you actually saw the impact of the dolphin with the out-of-control helicopter. And you saw them fall to the ground and explode. And it just started to feel gratuitous. And oddly, you wouldn't think that would be the case. You would think that would give some sense of closure. But it actually flattened the feeling out, and you were sort of left feeling the way Neville does when you aren't quite sure, when you just about get to the impact and you come out. And it was something interesting to discover. Also a little bit of a last-minute ad.
It's not a little bit. It's about as last minute as it's the last thing we shot, isn't it? In the reshoots.
That's true. We shot the element of Willow and Sally here on stage with, I think, days before we were going to turn it all in.
Days before we were going to release the movie.
Yeah. And again, this brings us into the mindset of Robert Neville. Just like seeing the mannequin's head turn, he at first sees his family in the kitchen.
It was always something we talked about as a motivation for the character as he moved into that room, and then we suddenly took the opportunity when we were back doing some pickups to actually put it in the movie, not so that we were, as Francis says, moving with Will's point of view, essentially. Because it is a point of view movie, not literally, but psychologically.
Every movie has the key scenes and the scenes that all the actors focus on, and it's the one you sort of anticipate and dread and are excited about because they're sort of the pivotal scenes. And so our kitchen scene was definitely one of those scenes. That and our argument about God later were probably the two big ones for Elise and Will, and the ones that get talked about the most.
And then finally, of course, those are the ones that you manipulate the most in editing. Those are the ones that you search for on the day and in the cut.
Yeah. This was an interesting lesson for me, too, in the creation of a scene, because I went into this knowing that a lot of this movie was performance, and so Will and Akiva and I really would workshop, and with Elise too, workshop a lot of this. So it had a structure to it, and Akiva had written it very specifically. And then we went way off track in terms of workshopping and coming up with ideas and different things for people to say and not to say, and who are you looking at, who are you paying attention to, and what are you thinking about, and is it your family, and are you disappointed, and or are you excited to see somebody, and what's funny is it all informs the behavior in the scene, but then it all landed exactly back to the way that it was written, which is it now exists again in its simplest form. Yet the performances are now influenced by all of that play and workshopping, and I really enjoy that. And it's a scene that I'm really proud of just because I think it's entirely accurate in terms of a person's response to having strangers in their house after 3 years, the disappointment of it not being his wife and daughter, somebody in his space touching his stuff, you know, the research we did and how people deal with interacting socially once again, you know, after they've been by themselves for so long.
But you know, you bring up this idea, which I think I'm now referring to in my mind as the ham hock theory, which is, I think, very, very important in movie making, which is sometimes you create, like when you make a soup with a ham hock, you make the soup with the ham bone in it, and then you take the bone out. You never intended to have the bone in the thing you serve, but it flavors it. And I think, you know, people get scared of taking detours, but in fact, if you get it the original way and then you get a bunch of detours, finally it's flavoring what you leave in. Even if you cut the detour out, whether it be dialogue or performance, it still informs the scene.
Oh, absolutely. But the weird thing is on the day when you've got the time, you know, the clock ticking, what happens is all that workshopping, suddenly you are, you know, you roll cameras, you call action, they go in the scene, and it feels like this big improv session. And it doesn't feel like a scene, and it's taking half an hour to get through the scene, and you sort of suddenly panic. What have we done to the scene? And then on the day, you have to reshape it, and, you know, everybody's kind of super sensitive and defensive, and,
that was, you know, that day,
And, but then, you know, it all informs itself, and it's kind of fun, but you definitely need time to be able to do those kinds of things.
And I think you got to always remember, get it the way you planned on getting it first. I just mean in terms of structure. And then start screwing around.
Right, absolutely. Where he finds the kid, Ethan.
This is the only time that Shrek has ever been used actually outside of Shrek, and that was because Will called Jeffrey Katzenberg and said, "Could we please use it?"
But again, I love this idea that, you know, it's kind of a funny sequence, but what he's really seeing here, and what I think he's playing a little in the beginning, is this idea that he hasn't seen a child sitting in front of the TV watching Shrek since his daughter sat there.
This scene's length we manipulate. It's very interesting because Will actually did do this, and Francis's instinct, which I think is right, is that the more you can see of it in a run, the better it is. So what we ended up doing was actually sort of trying to take chunks that were entirely on Will and then take chunks that were off Will and not cut back and forth too much. And I think it kind of worked nicely.
Yeah. But it's about half as long as the segment we shot. We sort of thought that you could get that really long run, but you never quite know until you see it. But again, the scene not sort of saying exactly what it is. This was, you know, an apology. The beginning of an apology for Will.
Name this one.
This we did a bunch of times. This chunk, which we sort of call our day in, and our day out, ended up being the most work in editorial for us.
Absolutely.
This is where the movie changed around. And this we shot, the scene here at the kitchen table, we reshot at the very end. And it used to be a much different sequence.
The information here and the transitions here, which are compressed, actually took place over the course of 20 minutes of scene work and an extra day out. This was in order to accelerate and focus and keep the movie in a kind of more intense space. Because remarkably, what happened in our other sequences, although it increased in scope and scale, it took the air. It let the air out.
And what we wanted to do here specifically, too, was sort of restate Neville's and Anna's goals. So the idea is that Neville still exists in this sort of fantasy land of, no, this is my site. I'm not leaving. This is my site. This is my zone. I can still fix this. Which to me is what this scene's really about. But you also get to see that Anna wants to leave and that she's heading to Vermont. Into this idyllic place that she thinks exists out beyond Manhattan, where there are people and survivors. Close-up pulsing temple, the breathing, the eyelashes, everything about this shot is fantastic.
And it's all CG.
Yeah. Used to be, between that last scene and this scene, many, many, many exterior shots of Manhattan where Neville and Anna went out and spent a day. Some very cool stuff.
There is really cool stuff in there. And interesting, good scene work, too. This is the wardrobe jump.
On Elise,
Yeah,
right.
which I
Because of time passage.
Yes, exactly. Although, God, I seem to remember we were concerned about it.
Yeah.
Wall of the Dead, which is really more significant, although still significant in our current ending, was more significant in our original.
In the original, right.
Did all of them?
Theme, which Francis and I have called "Who's the Monster," which is really a theme that's very consistent with the source material, the original novella, and our movie, although I think in its current form works with that theme, in its original form, which we'll see when we talk about the alternate ending, really landed on it.
Right. And you can feel it in this one, which is very interesting. You know, we sort of thought
The hammock theory.
Yeah, we created a new ending that we felt, we really could put on this. And then, when you watch it, you just see that I've been working on a movie over time with a specific ending in mind. It's just built into the DNA of it. And a lot of that, you sort of feel the idea that these creatures are more intelligent than Neville thinks. And this idea that he's kind of lost emotional connection with the creatures all plays into the original ending. Their ending, that shot of Elise walking in is not flipped. We flipped it because in this ending, she has a tattoo on her neck of a butterfly that doesn't exist in the other ending.
That's right.
And so we needed to hide that.
And also, in this version, when he first examines the girl,
Yes.
there is no butterfly.
There's no
And in
butterfly.
the other version, there is, right?
Right.
You got it back in?
Mm-hmm.
It's past of Van Gogh, right?
Yep.
That
The paintings.
we had this idea that he went to the museums and stole them, and they're all over the house, but we never say it. So we tried to find art that would be in New York and then construed traveling shows
Right.
when we couldn't.
But most of it's actually from New York museums,
Yeah.
And when I remember one of my favorite museum-going moments of all time was sort of going into MoMA and seeing Starry Night, not knowing it was there.
And do you remember we once had a scene early on where he and Sam used to go and just sit in the museum
And have lunch.
Yeah.
That's right.
The movie?
Yes, we have a few. This is one of them.
I think 6.
And again, one of the things we've gotten the most flack for, which is how can a 20-something-year-old girl not know who Bob Marley is? But not everybody's educated on music.
That's exactly right. For
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah, it used to be the love scene, where they kissed.
Yeah, and moved suggestively towards the couch.
Yes, it did.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. But we took that out.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. What happened was, and again, these are the things that you learn as you make the movie, which is we were invested in his relationship with his wife and child.
Mhm.
And even
And
though they were dead,
It felt too soon.
yeah, felt too soon.
And he still felt connected to them, which this ending really keeps,
Right.
which is his connection to his wife and child.
Right.
Performing a peace rally.
Neurologist philosophy, which is something that we sort of came up with as we were working through sort of character and theme in early version of the screenplay and then in rehearsals.
Yeah, and we're all big Bob Marley fans, and I remember I think Will came up with starting the use of it. Just he was looking up legend, I am legend, and saw legend on the internet and Bob Marley's album, and brought it up and started thinking about it. And then Akiva, you wrote the speech, which was great, and then we decided to name Willow's character Marley, and started to use the songs, and I'm just so excited that we got to use. Nobody uses Bob Marley songs in
Kinda
movies,
great,
and it's
right?
unbelievable, and especially Redemption song.
Yeah.
We get Redemption song in there as gaff there. That's actually he's wearing the shirt from the first day, but we decided to
tweak it in the DI.
a little bit.
Oh, no one knows.
This was the other scene that was our sort of anticipated, dreaded
Right.
scene, which is the big sort of confrontation over God, where Neville has.
And as costumes go, she's actually in her post-coital
That's
garb
right,
here,
you're right.
which nobody notices.
But this is where we see that sort of Neville has chosen faith in science, and that Anna has chosen faith in God to sort of get them through, because, to survive this kind of apocalypse, you have to have faith in something. You have to have some sort of hope. And these two characters are just coming at their hope from different vantage points.
I said, how do you know?
wow, Anna might be a little
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Oh, look, turns out Neville's not the only Looney Tune
Yes,
in the movie.
exactly. And there used to be much more of Anna, this sort of build up to Anna saying, God basically speaks to me.
Both of these characters are actually kind of diagnosably mad.
Yeah.
Which is something that I think we liked. I mean, it's a circumstance where you'd be crazy not to be crazy.
Yes.
And both of them are dealing with that, as Francis says, in very different ways. But fundamentally, the characters in their most extreme are the more interesting characters to work with, certainly as a writer and I think as a director.
I always like the idea, that also being crazy is normal. You know, the idea of being crazy is a majority idea, right? That you're only crazy if you're different than the majority. Right. But here, you are the majority, so you're actually not crazy even though you are crazy.
That's right.
Which is kind of fun.
Crap into set.
Yes, he did, which made me very nervous. I thought the idea was very cool until he actually came.
And then we were all like,
sat next to me in the chair.
And we're all literally like, oh my God, it's Steven.
But luckily it was a very cool scene, and Will and Elise were both great in it, and he came right after we had done some really powerful takes, and so we got to show him some stuff. Although he was there when we were doing some pretty boring stuff, I think just kind of locking doors and things, but still I have to say that I don't think I can remember being as nauseous as
This is actually a little bit of a patch, too, because she used to go upstairs.
Yeah, well, he used to say some other things. Yeah, the argument for a while, we had a version that got a little more heated, and we shot 2 endings to this. And one, he said some other things, she slapped him, and then went upstairs, and she was already upstairs by the time he heard the sound.
Right. And so now you'd revert back to either version of the movie.
Yes.
CG is maybe not its strongest, and this attack has gone up and down in scale. We finally ended up wanting to use the smaller, well, this is kind of a smaller, much scaled down version of what this attack once was.
Yeah, there used to be a lot more of the bombs. The crowd of monsters used to be much larger. He set off many more bombs before, this big final one here.
Exterior shot of
we had
Washington
this
Square
huge
Park.
explosion. It was much more of an action sequence, and I think, in all honesty, this is probably my least favorite section of the movie. And I think, what I always fell in love with was the man alone. And I think what happens here that we were always fighting and why we worked on this section so much is that it reverts to genre a little and becomes a little less interesting to me. Although it's still pretty exciting and kind of fun, especially for genre fans. But it sort of now kind of goes from character and goes into plot. But there's still some fun stuff here. The end, that Washington Square Park sequence was shot over about 6 weeks, but now is surprisingly whittled down to near
it's
nothing.
Like 4 shots.
Yeah, it's like 4 or 5 shots. But stuff is kind of fun.
This it gets back into something that's sort of more interesting again because the scale comes down again.
Yeah, and you're back with him.
Yeah.
It was also, that was part of the problem, was we did a real point of view break that we hadn't really done, which is we're sort of out in the park running with the creatures and...
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, it was something we shot at the very beginning of our schedule. It was some of it was sort of additional unit photography, and so what happened was I don't think we knew enough yet to be able to make a sequence that would have actually. There's probably a version of that sequence that could have worked, but God knows what it was.
Yeah, we would needed to have done some reshooting,
like another 6 weeks in Washington Square Park, and they weren't ever letting us near Washington Square Park again. Alternation of close-ups that are kind of good
and some mediums that are bad.
Not so good.
But some of this is kind of fun. I like some of this sort of shit.
Yeah, and I really like it when he goes back upstairs and and you're back into this kind of the creature in the ceiling. This is fine. There's a gas tank. That's an actual practical explosion and things being pulled with wires, and that's not a real person.
Yeah, I like that bit there.
Yeah.
And that's surprisingly, like, stunts usually suck the first time you do them, and that was the first time. That was actually kind of nice, that whole explosion and Will in the foreground. And
You just said explosion.
Explosion?
Explosion. Boy, he's fast. And then we actually got away with, my gun's empty, let me drop it.
It goes up, searching for Anna and Ethan. This is kind of fun because we built all these floors separately, and then we had one big stairwell on our first floor set that we could use. So it was always like, how do you jump around with the stairwells and things? Then we had our guy Asa, our one Jewish creature.
The Jewish Hemocyte.
Yeah,
in my tribe. And this I like. I think this is
Yeah,
kind of
this
good
is a
and
nice-
scary, and holding the, just
Except I did want the child to urinate. I really wanted him
I
to
know you
urinate,
did.
and that was going to
I
be
know
what
you
the
did.
creature smelled.
Yes,
But for reasons we won't talk about,
we won't.
we decided not to not to shoot.
Not to do the peeing.
Yes, the peeing.
This I see, like that's really good work.
Yeah.
To the others.
I love that shot too.
Yeah, me too.
The dying creature was good. Alpha, who's about to come in.
We experimented with length on this moment too, longer, shorter, pause, not pause.
Yeah. Not real. Too, when you're doing a movie that has 800, I can't even imagine those movies that have 2,000 effect shots.
Yeah.
But just trying to get it done, when you could really use an entire another year of sitting in post and working on things and working and working and working when you get into this stuff.
It's like James Cameron will push a movie a year.
Yes,
You know what I mean? To get it right, and I get it.
Absolutely. And we're getting close to the moment where we sort of are
Branching.
our story splits into the ending we have now or the original ending. And what's interesting is both endings, again, fantastic shot for a close-up. I think that's just great. What's interesting is I really like both endings, They're both entirely, they could not be more different. And they both work in their different ways. And I think we found that the original ending, which you'd see, lands on much more of a philosophical idea, whereas this ending lands on a much more emotional level. And what's fun about it is that when we knew we were going to do this new ending, we actually shot the ending on video, starting from about here. And we set up in our editorial office a fake little mock-up of the lab, and we had Will, and he had a fake gun, and we had our post supervisor acting as the alpha male here, and office assistants, as the different characters, and we sort of did a little moving storyboard, which is kind of fun to watch that we cut. So we knew specifically what we were going to need to shoot to get the new ending and to make it match. And Will had about 10 days, because he had just shot Hancock and had gained, 35 pounds or something for Hancock. And he had 10 days to drop.
Butterfly.
There's the butterfly in the cracks.
He had 10 days to drop. This, in ours, in the new ending, you see the butterfly occurs as an act of essentially God. And this triggers him to look at Anna, and there's her butterfly. And so, Marley's words, it's a butterfly daddy. This idea that there is a plan, that there's a larger sense of connectedness that Anna has been talking about is... it's triggered in that way in this version, which is slightly different than the way it's triggered in our original.
Exactly.
Version.
Yeah, and this is sort of the idea that his revelation is that, maybe it's not just all science, it's actually science and some other force that's out there.
And this is all our new ending,
Yes.
which is the idea that his place is here with his family, and that her purpose is to
Go to Vermont with the blood.
this thing that he has disputed is now, because of his revelation that there is a world bigger than the world he lives in. He believes now that Vermont exists, and that he gives her the blood to come full circle, which is to go home to his family. His purpose, which he started out the movie with, which was to find the cure and to save humanity. He has acquitted himself of this, we hope, or he hopes, and now his work here is done.
Drew pulls the pin. Performance. And then we shot this next bit.
Did you just say very nice to your own movie?
I like that part. It's very nice. The explosion, the little moment where you contact, and then we went out and we just caught the back end of fall. This was probably 2 weeks before the movie came out, or 3 weeks before the movie came out, and we shot it in Mount Airy, New Jersey. And we had Al Cirillo, who's the best helicopter pilot on the planet, shoot that stuff, and then we went out and shot our Vermont village in Mount Airy, New Jersey. All of the critics, which would be, getting on and off the island. If you were the only person and you needed to get on and off Manhattan, you would probably take a boat.
You could, in fact, take a boat.
Yes, or you could swim across the Harlem River. It's not that big of a deal.
But in fact...
But that's not the same car she had on Manhattan, because people seem to think she took that car.
All right. Okay.
I'm defensive.
I breathe through it. Let it go. Church. We, by the way, so not on purpose. That's actually what was there.
Yeah.
Big doors.
Dogs.
People.
Sort of our nod to Sam.
Yeah. and hippies, apparently.
Yeah.
Dedicated his life to
We
the
felt, actually, interestingly enough, with this voiceover is consistent with the idea of telling somebody's story.
Right. Of legend.
he gave his life to defend.
The Wire.
Oh, it's, by the way, there are different versions of this
Yeah,
shot.
there are.
in
This is the better one, actually, than what's on in the theaters. And then we have Redemption song kicks in here, which I love.
we love.
Yep.
And then credits.
That's it.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for watching.